Good afternoon and welcome to IAB There, our weekly live stream which we connect the digital advertising ecosystem. I'm Angelina Eng, VP of Programmatic and Data Center at IAB. In today's session, which is titled Beyond Identity, we'll be discussing how modeled and contextual solutions will help supplement scale and maintain relevant targeting and measurement, and how the industry can learn to prepare and develop a successful strategy to preserve addressability. So with that said, today we're excited to welcome to the show Amanda Tan, Senior Director, Product Management. Amanda oversees Xandr's investments in identity and privacy, working across the organization and industry to prepare for changes in light of shifting consumer expectations. Xandr is focused on helping publishers and marketers achieve addressability through first-party data and complement addressability offering with advanced modeling capabilities to expand reach across screens, including connected TV. Now, prior to Xandr, Amanda led product strategy efforts for MediaMatt's integrated social offering. With each role she's held in the ad tech space, Amanda has applied strong advisory skills, leveraging her experience as a management consultant at Deloitte. So let's start by having Amanda come to the stage. So welcome, Amanda. How are you?
Hi, Angie. Yeah, doing really well. Thanks for having me and really excited about today's discussion.
Great. So tell me a little bit about your role. What exactly does your day-to-day look like? What are the things that you're focused on? And how do you see, and where do you see, what are some of the changes that you're seeing in the marketplace and why your company's focused on those areas?
Sure, definitely a lot in there. So I oversee identity and privacy at Xandr. As everyone knows, it's been an area that has a lot of focus because there's change, right? Whenever there's change, there's going to be new things coming up. There's going to be questions. And a lot of my day-to-day is making sense of what's new, what's important in the industry in terms of, I guess, new proposals that are coming up, new identity solutions that are coming up, how that impacts various players in the marketplace, and then how solutions that are being discussed fit into some of the problems that are being exposed and are being discussed. Perhaps they've always been problems. So yeah, that's kind of my day-to-day. There's a team of product managers I work with who are all focused on understanding, the landscape and moving forward together with the industry.
So let's dive into, can you talk a little bit about some of the solutions that you're working on and why it's important that perhaps brands or agencies or publishers embrace those types of solutions?
Sure. So Xandr, is unique in that we have a buy-side platform that marketers and agencies use. We work with publishers. We've got an SSP, an ad server product. So the solutions that we think about consider, I guess, the marketplace effect and the connectivity across buyers and sellers, which is becoming a lot more important going into, I guess, this new world. Identifiers in the form of cookies and device IDs are the current proxy, right, for measurement, targeting, frequency capping, and all that. When I say proxy, it's not perfect, but it has been a really accurate and widely used proxy for being able to create segments, target, etc. Those, the loss of these device identifiers for really good reason, right? Like, I think that the privacy aspect, being able to build trust, maintain trust for publishers towards their consumers has become a really important priority. And so focusing on some of the privacy solutions, being able to serve ads where there is no explicit consent. We have products that help solve that problem. publishers who have embraced the fact that linked audiences or device identifiers that buyers and sellers both have access to are not going to be a long-term thing, have started to obviously enrich and or build up a first-party data set, proprietary publisher identifiers that is unique to their company, leveraging those and attaching new signals and meaning to those identifiers in order to preserve monetization and package up their inventory in different ways. Now, though that sort of trend is becoming more and more prevalent, right? So we're seeing a lot more closed ecosystems almost form, and instead of the current way of doing things, Xandr is looking at how to enable first-party selling strategies or first-party based selling strategies that allow publishers to monetize their first-party data asset while preserving the ability to control the access to those proprietary identifiers. That's important for them to ensure that their relationship and the trust with their consumers is being preserved, while still being able to connect, or rather allow buyers to still target on their inventory and make sense of that data. And Xandr is able to try and help make these signals meaningful for both for buyers to target, while helping publishers on the other hand preserve the integrity and access to their most valuable data asset. So thinking through some of these problems is kind of a long-winded way of saying it.
So let's, okay, so I'm going to try and dissect some of that. So publishers. Now, in your opinion, because when we did the state of data report that was released out in February, I don't have the exact stat in front of me and I should have it, but I don't. But for those, you can find it on IAB.com. I believe when we asked about first-party data, one, we saw that third-party data spend increased year over year from last year, about 8%. And investments in first-party data kind of remained flat. And when we dived into, when we specifically honed in on the publisher community, many of them, and I'm going to say 48%, I could be wrong, but a majority of them, or a good portion of them, were saying that they did not think that they had enough first-party data and enriched data to use for targeting. Let's talk about that, right? So,
sure.
Are you seeing many of the publishers building out their first-party data strategy? And when I talk about that particular first-party data strategy around registration data, user volunteered information, and then you have the other aspect of what we'll call at Tech Lab with the seller-defined audiences, where they're creating audience segments, leveraging a combination of first-party data, supplemental data, first-party cookies, et cetera. So which side of the coin are you seeing the most activity in?
Honestly, I feel like the publishers that are successful are looking at both.
Okay.
First and foremost, I think being able to recognize users, whether it's via a logon event or a first-party cookie, and to attach meaning to some of those, I'll say identifiers, allows the publishers to understand their users, right? And I think publishers that, advertising use cases aside, that publishers that do those are inherently building trust and a relationship with those customers and enhancing the experience on their sites and properties. And so I would say that, a lot of publishers can do that. For those that can't, or just may not have, a product that a user engages as much across various different types, like non-news type publishers, then I think the skew towards using more, you mentioned seller-defined audiences, more contextual-based signals, right? That are more category-based, will be a much larger part of their strategy compared to others who are able to, attach meaning to first-party cookies, attach meaning to some of the actual user-based identifiers that they are able to collect. But should they stop there? Because buyers don't have access to that data. So I think it's a combination. And then there's also, if you've tagged your users with certain traits and you're able to monetize fully with identifiers, great. Those are typically the larger scaled publishers. Considerations include, should you then also extend targeting or monetization strategies by leveraging the more linked IDs, like some of the UID2, RAMP ID are some of the more prevalent examples, right? Those can supplement your first party data strategies or ID strategies. And then, I think a lot of sellers we work with also want to define their own custom taxonomies as opposed to using some of the more standardized ones. Those are decisions that publishers can make based off their data assets and their access to data. So I think all that said, it's less one or the other. It's more what skew and how they complement each other that I think is important. And as a platform business, Xandr thinks through some of these cases with our customers, and deliberately considers how the offerings and the solutions build upon one another, and help facilitate, again, connectivity to buyers in the marketplace we facilitate. So definitely interesting to see how that evolves.
And are you seeing a lot more interest in things like private marketplace deals or automated guarantees, or is there, given the fact that there's less IDs out there, and as you mentioned, like with Privacy Sandbox, it'll be a little bit more, I know that on the agency side, when I was, right, programmatic, the premise of programmatic was more of the automation of being able to transact with the publisher through a platform rather through paperwork, like an insertion order, right? So are you seeing a shift in more thought into packaging in things like private marketplace deals? And the portfolios, are they more diverse now than ever?
Yeah, you already mentioned the word that I was gonna say, right? Packaging. I think that is happening a lot more. A lot of categories and a lot of inventory has to be aggregated and packaged in a way that doesn't expose some of the more proprietary elements of them. I don't know if the shift has been dramatic in the web environment just yet. In some regions, I think things have moved a little bit faster in that space. I'd say Europe, with GDPR being a thing, way before Google even made the announcement. When was that now? I can't even remember. It
2.5 years ago.
Right? 2.5 years. Wow. Everything time has walked. But what was I saying? I think in some of those regions, the acceleration of packaging and I think proprietary data that, the access to some of those inventory private marketplaces is going to be limited. It's a little bit more there than some of the other regions where privacy laws haven't been as strict. But in connected TV, for example, that's been the norm.
I was just going to get into CTV. So
exactly.
Great transition there.
So
like with connected TV, right? CTV, connected TV, OTT, online video advertising. Obviously, during the pandemic, there has been significant shifts from linear spend over into the CTV marketplace. Sure. What are some of the things that you're most excited about as you're thinking about the future of online digital advertising in that CTV space?
Yeah, I actually started, my shift into the ID world because of CTV, like before the announcement was made and before everyone was scrambling about how to target users cross-site on digital. My role is to basically understand the CTV landscape. Obviously, IDs have never, a persistent, cross-app IDs for connected TV has never really been a thing. The norm has always been, closed ecosystems deals, private marketplaces, etc. In a big way, like the whole advertising landscape across devices is becoming a little bit more akin to CTV. And so, some silver lining, if you like, that there is holistic approaches across devices that can now be applied, not just to CTV, but to web and mobile buying. Like an example is, Xander's working on, as part of some of the more modeled or extrapolative solution suite that we're building to complement ID-based strategies, where we're thinking about advanced frequency management, right? That is a method of allowing brands and buyers to maintain exposure or caps on exposure to a particular user, but having those models not rely on specific IDs. Solving that problem for CTV itself was never really a thing, but now we have another bigger reason, or rather, to think through how some of these really important capabilities, like limiting exposure to users, needs to be addressed for, I guess, web and mobile properties. Those models extend to CTV. So holistically, you can, as a brand, work with, I guess, tech partners to try and manage these things holistically for across devices. That's just one example. Yeah.
Now, in the CTV space, many of the providers rely on IP address, right?
Sure.
I'd love your perspective with, and not just around CTV, but the premise of IP address, right? There's changes with Apple around private relay. Google has their own version of private relay. Companies are trying to mask IP addresses. What's your take on this in terms of is there going to still be, and then you have IPv6 versus IPv4, which have kind of caused some geolocation challenge. I just would love to hear, where you see, this notion of focus of leveraging IP signals for targeting. Where's the industry moving towards, and what did you see?
It's again, it's a proxy for a household. It's used for fraud detection. It's used in many of the more recent ID solutions. I think Xander does also. When I say Xander, we do build solutions that don't rely, I guess, on IP, because we do understand that it is an identifier that can actually be it does identify, I guess, users and households in a way that isn't transparent to them. So I think there are uses for IP, but I think relying on, I guess you said, the availability of IP across regions and treating it as a signal that can just be used in a blasé manner probably isn't the most privacy centric way of thinking. I mean that. Yeah.
I would hope, and some of the things is there are signals that are being used by ad tech companies for really good purposes, and
agreed.
Right, and IP address has been very useful in providing relevant messaging, managing reach and frequency and all of that stuff. And I think that there needs to be more education to legislators as well as to consumers that it's really not a big brother factor here, right? So hopefully we can get that solved. But we have a few more minutes, and kind of your take on what are other areas that you're most excited that Xander's working on? There's tons of other, anything in the meta world or anything in the gaming category, or even other types of channels, audio, podcasts. I think you guys have been doing some stuff in those spaces as well.
Yeah, I'm personally the expert in some of these, I'd say channels. however, I think what's exciting these days, honestly, it's new signals. New signals that can be generalized, yet are, I think that facilitate some of the needs of relevant targeting and attribution, right? Like, I find it really hard right now to speak about some of the proposals that have come up, whether it's Privacy Sandbox, W3C discussions. There's obviously a lot, right? There's IPA, interoperable private attribution. There's topics.
Yep.
There was
Pledge.
Pledge, Parakeet, all these
Conversion
things.
API. Yep.
Exactly. I'm definitely excited about the conversations that are happening and some of the innovation that's happening for those. Those are all very much web-based and browser-based to a large extent. And I think the concepts there are exciting. It is difficult to know which ones are going to provide the outcomes that I guess buyers and sellers need in order to be able to facilitate, I guess, all the use cases that they're looking to solve. What I am excited about is understanding how these strategies complement each other, right? We talked about, like, topics would be a signal that is available in the bitstream. Say that becomes a thing. The IAB's content and audience taxonomies, those are new signals. You got first party data signals, publisher IDs, you have universal IDs as signals. How can brands and buyers and ad tech platforms and sellers be smarter about how to not match, but combine the use of some of these signals in a way that can help with meaningful models and meaningful extrapolation? I think those are things, and like, for me, it's a combination of how these things come together across formats, across devices, across strategies, that eventually help us, paint a better picture of the future while still enabling outcomes to be measured. I know I'm talking about an ideal state, but I think things are actually progressing in the right direction for those that are involved, right? And that keeps me going, right? Learning about a new strategy. Oh, how does that tie into some of this other stuff that brands and buyers are thinking about? So,
I mean, you're absolutely right, especially like listening to some of the conversations either at Tech Lab or at an event or in the W3C. Many companies are really questioning all the different tactics. Is this consumer friendly? How is this privacy safe? Does this comply with privacy regulations? So I think that from an addressability standpoint, there's a lot of creative opportunities, and you have different identity resolution partners that you mentioned in terms of different strategies and how publishers are going to use it. And we're not going to answer this today, but obviously for me, from a measurement and attribution standpoint, it is going to be a lot more fragmented, and that's an area I think that many companies, including you guys, are leaning very much heavily in terms of how do we actually solve it. We don't have full answers yet, but we'll get there.
Yeah.
Anything else you want to add?
Well, we could be talking about this, for a long time. But I think just to reiterate, I feel like jumping into the conversation actually is quite exciting, right? Like, I think as much as a lot of partners and players are leaning in, there are some that are still learning and in the early stages of discovering what this means to them.
Yep.
So I would encourage, folks to lean in, and maybe, the framing for this is not how can we increase addressability. And that is a big part of conversations I have. I think a lot of the talk to date, you said, 2.5 years ago was when the announcement was made by Google that cookies are going away. A lot of the talk has been, oh, how do we preserve addressability and how do we find the best identity solution? The way I would encourage the industry to think about this is how can I figure out the best suite or spectrum of solutions that help solve the various use cases that I need to solve, right? It's a blended approach, and one building a foundational ID base or data asset is important, but then working with partners and or figuring out how you build in-house capabilities to extrapolate, to make meaning out of the data for attribution, for targeting. That's where the exciting sort of development comes, and I think we'll get to a better place as a whole.
Well, thank you, Amanda, for your time. Unfortunately, you have to go, and let's continue this conversation, and perhaps we'll see each other at one of our future events. But so
thank you.
Thank
you.
No,
I certainly hope so.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for joining IAB There. We'll see you soon.